Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Quick update. Things are getting very real out there, and I'm hearing reports that Washington State will be voting on some kind of measure that will have in it concentration camps. And this is a really big deal because up to this point, there haven't really been specific laws that have been in place or enforced, but now they're saying if you refuse the sticker, they will put you in a camp. This is Washington State. This will be voted on in a couple days, and as we all know, the voting system is tainted. It is all a show, a display to make you think that you voted for it, when actually most people probably didn't. So this is just a heads up that things are about to get really weird. If this goes through, if this passes in Washington State, then I'm sure that other states will also follow suit, namely California, New York, and the other very liberal states. I don't expect this to happen in the southern states, but we've been having this discussion for the last 5 years at least on this channel about the Exodus, about the crossing eclipses, about getting out of the north, getting out of the places where your freedoms are being trampled on. It'll get to the point where it will be too late at some point. And hopefully we won't have to suffer too long because Christ will come back and deliver us. But who knows how long this is going to go on. And the enemy will simply just sit there and set up, temptations one after another after another. He'll use your children. He'll use whatever he has to use to force you to do what he wants you to do. Now, there is no spirit of fear, but God has been telling us to prepare for a very long time. As long as we've been on this channel, that's what he's been saying. And there are slow steps that you can take. I've made suggestions to people that, if you don't have the money to buy land, live with a parent for a year, and that might take some humbling. It might take some, maybe a little bit of begging, but that's how I did it. I lived with my mother when I went through hard times, and you just save money. And once you have your foot in the door and you've got a little bit of land, now you have some autonomy. You have some form of safety where things can't be taken from you. The number one threat to people, their number one fear is being cold and homeless. And once you take that out of the equation, you'd be amazed at how much empowerment you have in your life, how much autonomy, how much you're able to stand up and say no to things that you believe are unfair. But if you're at the will and mercy of the beast system and you constantly have this threat hanging over your head of nowhere to live, nowhere to keep warm, and no food to eat, then you will always give in, especially if you have children. Because the system, the beast system, works against good people like us, doesn't it? They threaten to take your children away from you. They will say you're an unfit parent. And if you have an ex involved in the situation, it complicates things even further. So we need to start thinking like Noah. We need to start thinking like the Hebrews and not wanting to be in Egypt and stand our ground, but get out to these other places where many of you will agree who come to this channel that they're not even enforcing anything in these places. We really don't own anything, Sherillah, but as I open the show, no one really owns anything. But what is the last thing they're probably going to take away? It would be people's property, because at that point, it would be civil unrest across the board, and we all know it, and they would not be able to contain it. Don't think of it as owning the land, because land shouldn't even be bought and sold, in my opinion, as you all know. Land should not be bought and sold. But we live in a system where it is. So, what's the next best thing? Don't mortgage stuff. Mortgaging puts you right back into the slave system. Like I said, you stay with the parent for a year, you work. Anyone making 10, $15 an hour can afford to save up $10,000 in a year by living with a parent that will help them out. Now, not everyone has that luxury, but a lot of people do. They have supportive parents or a friend even, and just tell them what your goal is. Say, look, this is the goal. Maybe make a deal with them. Maybe say, hey, if you help me do this, then the following year you can stay with me and you can save and get your land. We got to start working together. And so these are just some ideas. Now, we've talked about all these ideas, and we're getting to the point now where it's almost too late. But I remember several years ago talking about these things, and, a lot of people didn't even listen to those shows. Just really weren't interested, just thought it was fear mongering or something. Or I said, this has nothing to do with fear. This has to do with preparation, and this is a very biblical principle. Many, many times, Sodom, Gomorrah, Lot, and his wife were led out of the city by the angels. They had to prepare. They had to leave. They had to go at a moment's notice. There was no, oh, God will deliver us. We're just going to stay here. Had they stayed, they would have had sulfur and fire rain down upon them, right? And there's many, many biblical stories of deliverance. So when it's time to deliver, I can't think of a better time to get out than what's coming. Like what's happening in Washington right now, what's being talked about. Our greatest nightmare. You either take the Pokemon sticker or they put you in a camp. This is what they're saying right now. They're talking about it. In 2 days, this is what they're going to do. Now, we need everybody involved in this, I know some of us are in tough situations, but we have had a lot of time to prepare. We all know that. And this is going to be tough for a lot of people to hear, but you got to figure something out. If you're living in Sodom and Gomorrah, I talk to people that live in Vegas. I'm like, how do you live in Las Vegas? That is like the most evil city in all of America, pretty much. It represents everything God hates, but somehow people believe that they're okay living there. And what that is a condition of the heart. It's a condition of you're not letting go yet. Same thing with California. I grew up in California. You know how hard it was for me to leave that place? But I could feel the evil just incrementally creeping up and its effect on my children, its effect on my life. And it's time to get out. And people are like, you're crazy. You lived in like the best state. I'm like, no, it's not about, the material things that you can get or the beauty of the places. It's about being spiritually free to serve God and not be forced or coerced into doing things against your morals. And I don't care if I had to live in the Arctic, if I could get that and know that that's the place that I could have my rights and freedoms protected. And so this is a heart issue for many of us, okay? It's a heart issue. And we're still holding on to something sometimes when we refuse to leave or refuse to humble ourselves and get help from someone to save the money we need to get some land. Or we give in to, some of the naysayers who say, well, we don't own anything anyway. Well, guess what? First thing they'll come for is the pop sticks. After the pop sticks, yes, at a certain point, they will probably come for the land. But at that point, hopefully it'll be so close to Jesus' return that at least you won't have to suffer everything up to that point. Okay? So don't just write things off and say you don't own anything. Okay? There's plenty of opportunities still, even at this point in America, where you can have some acreage for $10,000 with no mortgage. I'm not talking just a down payment. I'm talking no mortgage, you guys. And I've had a few of you contact me for help with that. I'm not a real estate agent and I don't sell any land. I don't get any commissions or anything like that. That's not what this is about. This is about truly helping people get free from things. One of you got some land close to where I had land. And there are no restrictions on it. You can do anything you want. You could set up your own, what do they call those toilets where you don't have to have a septic system. You can put a tiny house on it. You can do whatever you want. And guess what? It can never be taken from you. And No one can ever force you to do anything against your will, especially if you're in a southern state. Now, many of you who live in the southern states, now is probably the time to chime in and tell us what's going on in your outlying communities and how things have been really easy for you in terms of the forced mandates and not being shamed and looked at weird when you go in stores. Time to chime in about that so people can know, because they don't show you that on the news. They don't tell you that in the news, that that's what's going on. They want you to see the hard line. They want you to see the threats. They want you to see all those things. But they don't want you to see the success stories of entire communities who rejected all of this, who are holding their ground, where they're not getting kicked out of their jobs. And that is happening in a very big area across the middle of America and the southern part of America. So I just wanted to update you guys on that. Things are getting a little weird right now with everything going on. And so I expect that this is going to, I expect this to pass. I expect that it will be on the books in Washington State. There are positions opened up for people to enforce the forcing of the stickers. And so now is the time. If you're sitting on the fence, now is the time to make some tough choices. Okay. And this isn't a fear thing. This is a warning. Okay. Now let's get into today's show. Enough of all that. We covered Baron Thump's marvelous underground journey last week. Many of you will remember. And some of you guys asked me to take a look at another one of Ingersoll Lockwood's books called The Last President. Here it is right here. Here's a really old copy of it, actually. And this published in 1900, 10 years after Barron's underground journey. Now, a lot of people have covered this already, or at least done a Cliff Notes version of it. But we're going to do a deep dive today for about the next 30 minutes. And some of the stuff that you may have heard before, but there will be other aspects of this that will be completely new to you. Now, why are we looking at this now? Well, because the book actually holds some really good ideas about how to fix the country. In other words, the real way to run a country, the biblical way, like how God would run a country. Okay? Now, this book is crazy because they actually mention Pence by name. Now, we're going to look at each of these pages so you guys can get an idea of what's going on. There's a little bit of a lag with, because it's such a huge PDF file. But look at here. They mention Pence's name by name as this Secretary of Agriculture. Let me zoom this up a little bit so you guys can see this. Mentioned one time in the entire book. Now, the book is about this controversial president, the last president, of course, who changes America forever. He's from New York, which makes this book, at first glance, feel like a prophecy of modern times, and more specifically, a Thump prophecy, right? But there's something else going on here, because throughout the whole CIA-run movements that saturated the media coverage during the Thump presidency and beyond, his followers really wanted to believe that this was a prophetic book about Thump being the last president. This is what they all wanted and thought, but upon closer examination, something else is going on here. Now, he obviously wasn't the last president for various reasons, but there are much more important reasons this book really didn't fulfill the prophecies within it. It read more like a propaganda piece that anticipated the Thump deception and offered people false hope and offered them, false promises in the way that he would, quote unquote, make America great again, right? This was his promise. So there's some of that in here, but most of this, he never intended to change and never even brought it up. And the book actually outlines strategies, specific strategies to turn America around. A strategy that Thump actually rejected when he was in office. Now I'm talking about things like Federal Reserve. They talk about big business. They talk about Wall Street. They talk about oppressive taxes on the poor and so much more. It's all mentioned in this book. They talk about a gold standard as well. So let's dig into this. Now, the book starts with this guy named Brian, and he is the last president. And he begins passing all these executive orders and systematically dismantles every aspect of America that was causing America harm and causing them to implode. For instance, here's our first example. Usury is mentioned. Now, this is crazy. Usury, we all talk about that now, but this book actually calls it out. Let's take a look at some of these instances here. Now, what is usury? Well, it's loaning money, keeping people in debt. It's basically an entire financial system that keeps people in debt and slaves to the government and the debtors that run them. Okay. Now, this particular page says, and yet at this moment, when the night air quivered with the mad vociferations of the common people, that the Lord had been good to them, that the wicked money changers had been driven from the temple, that the stony-hearted usurers were beaten at last, that the people's William was at the helm now, that peace and plenty would in a few moons come back to the poor man's cottage, that silver was king, I king at last, the world still went. Let's go to the next page. Wondering why red-eyed anarchy, as she stood in Haymarket Square with thin arms aloft, with wild mine and wilder gesticulation, drew no mob of dynamite from her bosom to hurl at the hated minions of the law who were silent spectators of this delirium of popular joy. So they're basically they're like rejoicing at this point because Brian is the new president and he's doing away with the usurers. He kicked the money out of the temples, right? Let's keep reading. Why was it thus? Look, and you shall know why white-robed peace kept step with the turbulent band and turned it through from red-handed pillage. He was there, the master spirit, to hold them in leash. He and he alone had lifted Brian to his great eminence. Without these 24 electoral votes, Brian had been doomed, hopelessly doomed. He and he alone held the great commonwealth of the West, hard and fast in the democratic line. Hence, he came as a conqueror, as a kingmaker, and the very walls of the sky-touching edifices trembled as he was dragged through the crowded streets by his orderly mob. So, it goes on. You're our savior. You've cleaned the temple of liberty of its foul horde of usurers. We salute you. We call you kingmaker. Brian shall call you master too. You shall have your reward. You should stand behind the throne. Your wisdom shall make us whole. You shall purge the land of this unlawful crowd of moneylenders. You shall save the republic. You are greater than Washington. You're a better friend of ours than Lincoln. You'll do more for us than Grant. We're your slaves. We salute you. So obviously they're worshiping this man, but he has some really good ideas in this book. Hooray, hooray, hooray. So everyone's all excited about this. There's one other mention of usurers here I want to show you on page 35. As it loads up. Now, he talks about also backing the money with gold and silver. And he also talks about how corrupt Wall Street is. He actually compares Wall Street to Satan. Let's read this part about the users first. Wicked and selfish class of users and speculators fasten upon you, and on this anniversary of the birth of the father of our country, let us renew our pledges to undo completely and absolutely their infamous work, and in public assembly and family circle, let us by new vows confirm our love of right and justice, so that the great gain may not slip away from us. but go on increasing so long as the statute books contain a single trace of the record of our enslavement. So talking about slavery to debt slavery. As for me, I have but one ambition, and that is to deserve so well of you that when you come to write my epitaph, that you set beneath my name the single line, here lies a friend of the common people. So this is how Brian was billed, a friend of the common people. Now let's get into this gold standard, because this is interesting. Let that load up. Brian is elected. Our day has come at last. Down with the oppressors. Death to the rich man. Death to the gold bugs, they call them. Death to the capitalists. Give us back the money you have ground out of us. Doesn't it feel like that way in America? The money they ground out of us. Give us back the marrow of our bones, which you have used to grease the wheels of your chariots. Police force was now almost helpless. The men still used their sticks, but the blows were ineffectual and only served to increase the rage of the vast hordes now advancing upon Madison Square. Now, they talk about police shortage, which is happening right now. It's all here in the book, you guys. This book is actually happening right now. The Fifth Avenue Hotel will be the first to feel the fury of the mob. Would the troops be in time to save it? Now, this is Fifth Avenue Hotel, is very close to Thump's Hotel. A half cheer, half cry of joy goes up. So let's keep going with this, because there's more about this gold standard. Let's go back to page 14. Bayonets crossed and clashed in bearing down some vigorous foe, doubly vigorous foe. As the bells rang out after midnight, the last remnants of the mob were driven to cover, but the wheels of the dead wagons rattled till daybreak. And then the aged governor, in response to the mayor's, "Thank God we've saved the city," made answer. Let's go to the next page here. 22. So, here we go. Now, they talk a lot about the common people and how this president was able to relate to the common people. It says here, the common people who were so dear to Mr. Bryan and who had made him president in the very face of the prodigious opposition of the rich men, whose coffers had been thrown wide open, all to no purpose, and in spite too of the satanic and truly devilish power of that hell upon earth known as Wall Street, which had sweated gold in vain in its desperate efforts to fasten the chains of trusts and the claws of soulless monsters known as the corporations upon these very common people, soon to march in triumph before the silver chariot of the young conqueror from the west. Talk more about gold here. Universal gold standard. Now, these are all concepts that people who love freedom talk about all the time. Why isn't money backed by gold? Why are these people able to borrow this money, hand it out, with nothing to back it up? Well, because we're on the petrodollar, aren't we? Well, obviously that's going to end soon, because we don't have much interests in the Mideast anymore in the oil. That's all starting to dwindle down. So obviously this is all going to change. So what is the next standard going to be? Well, it isn't going to be gold, because that holds people accountable, right? They can't just print money to make themselves rich. So it says, in order that there may be immediate relief in the terrible financial depression now weighing upon our beloved country, consequent upon and resulting from the unlawful combination of capitalists and moneylenders, both in this republic and in England, and that the ruinous and inevitable progress toward a universal gold standard may be stayed. The President orders and directs immediate abandonment of the so-called gold reserve, and that on and after the promulgation of this order, the gold and silver standard of the Constitution be resumed and strictly maintained in all the business transactions of the government. So they got rid of the reserve, and it's about the gold standard. Let's keep reading. They talk more here about the gold reserve. Oh, we already read that part. Now, they talk about also a different kind of tax system that doesn't allow greedy, corrupt corporations off the hook. You know, the people whose lives are unaffected by the oppressive working class laws that keep people in poverty, they are the ones that run this country. They don't know the daily struggle that people like you and I go through, worried about the future, worried about where we're going to live, where, rent's going up. Let me give you an example. I live in an area here in Connecticut right now. This isn't going to be my permanent home, but because of Vidco, all these remote people who wanted to work and get out of the city of New York have now come here and driven up the prices, almost doubling the rent. Now, at any given time, I could get a phone call from my landlord and he could say, oh, time to, double your rent or whatever the case may be. These are the kinds of fears that people like you and I live in, right? That we're on the whim of these people. And then when they start pushing through their unfair laws, we're the ones who are forced to do it. People at the top don't care about stuff like that because they're not worried about what they're going to eat or where they're going to live. They might be worried about keeping their millions and billions, but they're not worried about the things that you and I worry about. And this is why you can never trust these people to rule over you, because they have no idea what your life is like. They have no idea. And when they say things like, when inflation was happening, and then they got up in front of all of us and tried to tell us that, oh, it's no big deal. Oh, it's no big deal to you because you make, double six-figure income. So of course it's no big deal to you. But this is a big deal to people when their grocery bills double over the past year. A lot of people can't afford that. Oh, but then they'll say, oh, you just need to work harder and improve your situation. Well, people are tired of working harder. Okay. Now, let's keep going with this, because they talk about this tax system that taxes profits, not the common man who lives paycheck to paycheck. Now, I don't think that any taxes are biblical. You guys know my feelings on that. But if you had to have a tax system, I think everybody agrees that the rich, by definition, are taking on far less of the burden of just living their life than people like you and I. And they should take on the majority, the profits of their labor, not just their businesses, just the profits of their labor should be what's taxed. Let's keep reading. Let's go to page 18 here. And read about this tax system that they're talking about here. All right, it says, all was peace and goodwill, for the people were at last victorious over their enemies, who had taxed and tithed them into a very living death. And that's exactly what it feels like with oppressive taxes. Now the laborer would not only be worthy of his hire, but it would be paid to him in a people's dollar for the people's good. And now the rich man's coffers would be made to yield up their ill-gotten gain, and the sun would look upon this broad and fair land and find no man without a market for the product of his labors. And that's the way it should be. In the greatest country that we're told that we live in the world, every man who is willing to work a full day should have a product for his labors. He should be able to live a comfortable life without any worries of anything, pretty much, if you're in the greatest country in the world, if you're willing to go out and work 40 hours a week. And it doesn't matter what you do. You could be a janitor, or you could be anything. Whatever it is that you choose to do, if you're willing to work, should provide you a secure future. Okay. It's everything else that's gotten in the way that has not allowed that to happen in America. That's how the working poor class emerged. We should have had laws against that. There should be no working poor class in America. I don't know how you get there. You don't get there by giving out a bunch of money. You get there by saying, we're not going to allow this or that in America. We're not going to allow someone to have to work 40 hours a week and still be poor. So whatever we need to do to fix that, we need to do it. If that means less profits coming out of these corporations, then that so be it. So what they've done is they've convinced everybody that if we tax the rich, then the rich won't create jobs for us. And that's simply not the case. Rich people are always going to want to be rich. They're always going to, do things to try to get rich. That's what rich people do because they want power and control. And there's no reason why someone should be so rich and at the expense of the people working for them that they can afford to buy $500,000 cars and live in huge mansions and just spend. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. That's greed at that point. Now, some people would say, well, there shouldn't be laws against greed. It should be a person's right to be greedy. Well, yeah, it's a person's right to be greedy, I suppose. But are we here on the bottom just going to simply put up with that? Aren't we the majority? Shouldn't we be able to make laws that say, you know what? You can be greedy, but there are going to be limits to your greed. Because many people are suffering because you want more stuff. So, I don't know. Some people might disagree with me on that, but let's keep reading here. Henceforth, the rich man should, as was right and proper, pay a royal nation's taxes on his broad shoulders, where they belong. So they're talking about a better and more fair tax systems. That's what they're talking about here. Now, let's keep going with this as we get through this. We're about 3/4 of the way through. So, at this point in the book, things just descend into civil war. Why? Because the dollar crashes and people have no food. Now, the book isn't really clear on how or why this happens. It's spawned out of fear. Here's an analysis of all of the chapters here. This is in Reddit. I'll link this in case you guys want the Cliff Notes version of it. But this summary goes through all of the actual chapters, everything we just talked about. But basically, everything descends into this civil war, the North and the South. And there's like speculation that occurs because of the silver gold standard. And the one thing that the president does that doesn't make any sense in this book is that he taxes the South, who is way poorer than the North, but he overtaxes the South. And that part of the book really didn't make sense to me, but it really angered them. They were almost being like punished for like the civil war that had happened previously, a couple decades earlier, is kind of what I got out of that part of the book. Well, then the North ends up rebelling against the government too. So both the North and the South rebel against the government. So the president shows up at the Capitol, but he's already been ostracized. He's forbidden to speak, and he's actually asked to resign. Then a BOMB goes off and blows up the crapper hole right on New Year's. And at that point in the book, the democracy is dead. Now, does all this sound familiar? Because remember Cruella Harris said that they found a BOMB at the Crappet hole and she was like in real danger and like they disarmed it or something, but yet they can't find the people who put it there with all the cameras they have there. And all of that happened 6 days after the new year at the crapper hole, just like in the book. Weird. So the president's minions enter the crapper hole, but their voices are not heard. That's what happened in real life. But in the book, it's the president who enters and his voice is not heard. Let's read page 55 here. and 56, the very end of the book here. Now, this is like a pretty creepy ending. A lot of people took note of that. Let's read this. With a sudden blow that startled every living soul within its hearing, the speaker's gavel fell. The president, said he with superb dignity that called down from the galleries a burst of deafening applause, must not make reference to pending legislation. Constitution guarantees him the right from time to time to give to Congress information of the Union. He must keep himself strictly within the lines of the constitutional limit or withdraw from the bar of the House. A deadly pallor overspread the face of the chief magistrate till it seemed he must sink then and there into this sleep which knows no awakening. But he gasped, he leaned forward, he raised his hand again imploringly, and as he did so, the bells of the city began to toll the hour of midnight. The new year, the new century was born. I mean, this is so eerily cryptic and so in line with what happened at the crapper hole, isn't it? Right around the same time of the year. But with the last stroke, a fearful and thunderous discharge as of 1,000 monster pieces of artillery shook the crapper hole to its very foundation, making the stoutest hearts stand still and blanching cheeks that had never known the coward color. The dome of the crapper hole had been destroyed by dynamite. In a few moments, when it was seen that the chamber had suffered no harm, the leader of the House moved the final passage of the act. The president was led away, and the Republican senators and representative passed slowly out of the disfigured crapper hole, while the tellers prepared to make the vote of the House. This is crazy, you guys. The bells were ringing a glad welcome to the new century, but a solemn tolling would have been a better thing, for the Republic of Washington was no more. It had died so peacefully that the world could not believe the tidings of its passing away. As the dawn broke cold and gray, now obviously that's a double meaning there, right? The dawn, right? Dawn, thump. Wow, let's keep reading here. And as the first dim light fell upon that shattered dome, glorious even in its ruins, a single human eye, filled with gleam of devilish joy. So what is this? This is like the devil's eye, watching the end of democracy, watching to see how ultimately his right-left paradigm was able to implode humanity, to implode America in on one another. Let's keep reading. Looked up at how long and steadily, and then its owner was caught up and lost in the surging mass of humanity that held the crapper hole, girt round and round. Wow. So what does this book mean? These are the last sentences of the entire book. Let's go back into the chat and you guys can tell me what you think all this means. Here's what I think it means. I think we have in fact had our last president. What do I mean by that? Well, with 5G whiz coming online, there is no more democracy. There is no more real voting and real choices and real people in office, because any lie can be forced upon us from this time forward. And there will be no resistance. There can't be, because gee whiz will allow for complete, total, and domination and control. The last president is happening right now. Look at this article, for instance. Let's pull this up. Baiting the trap. Look at this. They want you to think that you can amass a resistance in America and make change about the things that you disagree with. And then what they do is, once they get you out in the field, they just pick you off one by one. Okay? That's what's happening. I see it all the time. People come to the channel. They're like, I got my pop stick, and this will never happen because we got pop sticks. Well, the minute you start talking and organizing about your pop sticks, that's already you're going to get picked up. That's what GWiz can do that they were not able to do before. This is why they're so emboldened. This is why they're passing these crazy laws, because they know they have the ability to do it, picking us off one by one. You guys, the time for change was 2 decades ago, before the electronic fence was complete. Now, we'll be talking more about Skynet in the upcoming days. Skynet is self-aware, and there is no more resistance. There is no more fair elections, voting. All that is gone now. There's only their way, and they will push it through using their algorithms and their ability to see real-time data and enforce the law in real time. They will squash any resistance. They'll discredit it. They'll rewrite the story to frame it as something that was necessary and something they had to do. And they will censor out any resistance, snuff it right out, just like they did in Crazy Stan. Right? Here's what they're doing in Crazy Stan. Pop stick to kill order. And think about it. They're trying to blame this on extremists, but do extremists loot things, and where are they going to take them to? They have a secret cubbyhole on the far side of town where they're storing all the things they took out? Of course not. Those aren't the people looting. The people looting are the people that live there. They're taking these things back to their house because they're getting something back for everything that was stolen from them, that is being stored up in the rich people's houses and that are in power and control. And they want a little bit of it back. It's because their food prices are rising and they're being told what to do and told that things were voted on and this is just the way it's going to be because it was voted on, and they know it's all BS and they're upset about it. Think about it. What extremists do you know that will go in and like take something? Where are they going to put it? They got convoys leading out of town into the neighboring country. Like, give me a break. This is crazy. So this is what they're trying to say. That way they can take you out with no warning. Now, Casey, I'm not doing anything wrong. I just follow what's lawful. Well, until laws like this get put into place that make absolutely no sense, that absolutely nobody voted for, you won't be able to resist this anymore. What they're talking about here, this is New York governor proposes the first ever statewide ban on gas hookups in new buildings. Do you know what this means for electricity costs? If you live in the Northeast, your electricity costs will be close to $1,000 a month. Your electricity costs will rival your rent costs. They will have you at your knees. A complete electric grid, the electric kingdom. And this is one of the coldest states in America, where electricity doesn't always work properly. And how is electricity created in the Northeast? A lot of it is from fossil fuels. So basically they're consolidating the right to use fossil fuels in the elite so they can control it. And you won't have the right to use a fossil fuel anymore. You'll be forced to use the electric kingdom. And this, what'll happen then at that point is these electric bills, your electric bills will bankrupt the middle class families. You'll be turning things off just to save money, freezing in your homes. Smart move, New York. But notice how bold these people are with their policies, because they know that voting isn't real and they'll be right back in office to further their agenda. Now, we'll be back on tomorrow with Between the Headlines, but I wanted to show you this too. There was a huge fire. 19 people died. And how did it start? Oh, here it is. It started with a space heater, which is what people use to stay warm in the winter. An electric heater. Now, if an electric space heater can cause this, don't you think electric heating could cause stuff like this as well? You got a consistent level of electricity going through, heating a house over long periods of time. And this is when wires start to short out and things start to happen. And we all know it, and they know it too. So to force us onto this electric grid is basically them taking us out. Look at this. Started with a space heater. Unbelievable. Investigators determined that a malfunctioning electric space heater plugged in to give extra heat on a cold morning started the fire in a 19-story building. 19 people died, 19-story building. Those are numbers that are occult numbers that they are warning us about the future to come. So that's pretty much it for the last president. I hope you guys got something out of that show to see how there is a real way to run the country. Kick out the usurers, kick out all the people who are greedy, who are just basically running the country so they can make even more money with their policies, which is exactly what's happening right here, right now, today. Creating policies to make them even richer, passing laws to mandate things that make them richer. How much more of this are we going to put up with? Well, it's clear to me now that we are in a slavery situation. There is no more question about it at this point. It's starting and it's touching everyone's life. Kicked out of their jobs, being forced to make really tough decisions. Heck, the children aren't even being allowed to go to school. Now, I know school is indoctrination, but many people depend on children going to school as a form of free childcare, don't they? I mean, if we're all being honest here, and they'll take their chances and try to indoctrinate their children when they come home. Not all people have the luxury of teaching their children at home. And if they're going to force us to pay tax dollars to send our children to school, then the children should be in school. Instead, parents are having to find ways to come up with childcare because they're not even allowing the children to come to school. So the children are sitting at home unsupervised. This is what's already happening. You guys, things have slid way down the hill. We're in a really tough spot and it's going to get worse. So you have to prepare. You have to try to do something to break free from whatever position of slavery you're in at this point. Around other like-minded people who are also free, who would never let someone come into their city and tell them how to run their city. And there are many places like that. Communities, real communities that believe in God. The whole community. The whole community. All right. So, I love each and every one of you. They took who out? Says Maylin. Someone got taken out here. Let me see here. Okay, you might have to repost that comment. Copy and paste it. I'll stick on here for a little bit and read your guys' comment. CB Radio Channel 19. Oh, wow. Children are suffering. Yes, need to come together. Moving to Florida. And DeSantis is a psyop. Notice I didn't say anything about Florida. I didn't say anything about Florida. I would not move to Florida. Florida is not the state you want to be in. There are many, many other states with hardly any people in them that are not going along with all this stuff. All you got to do is go on the internet and talk to people. There are groups. Facebook is good for some things. There are groups you can join and talk to people in some of these free states and see how their communities are being run and how they're not going along with all this stuff. Yes, Jesus is coming with the sword, and he has the right to use that sword, not us. Canada is gridlocked. I believe Florida might be a setup as well, unfortunately. Guess time will tell, right? Time will tell. Never stop waiting on Christ. All right. Could be a honey trap. This is one of their economic crises where the government controls electricity. Yes. Look, in 5 years, most of America is going to be mandatory electricity. Okay. It's the electric kingdom, electric cars, electric everything. And that's when they'll have us, because the cost of everything will be so expensive to use that electricity, it will become our slavery. It reminds me of the Dendera light bulb in Egypt. You know, they got that light bulb and everyone's standing around it and it's glowing, and it's like they're worshiping it. The devil shall transform himself into an angel of light to deceive even the elect, if it were possible. What do you think that angel of light is? Could that be electricity? Could it be? Look at all the ways the electric kingdom has deceived humanity through television, through an electric signal, right? And enslaving us through controlling the electric grid, turning it on, turning it off whenever they want, charging however much they want. There are different places. Why do you think it's so cheap? Why do you think the electricity is so cheap in Las Vegas? Well, that's because of the Hoover Dam, Casey. Yeah, but why did they build the Hoover Dam? You got to think 3 and 4 levels behind these people. Because they want you in Sin City. Oh, look. Electricity's cheap. Housing was really cheap. You could buy a house in Vegas for $100,000 like 10, 15, about 20 years ago. We'll say 20 years ago. Why do you think that was? Because they wanted you to come to Sin City. Devil always gives things away to get you to come. Right? He always does. And then they jack the price. I remember when hotels in Vegas were like $39 a night 25 years ago. I never did like that place. Gave me a creepy feeling. So, yes, I agree, Tanya. Bo Jiven isn't a president. We already had our last real president. And everything else will be just lies. Because once you control the data, then you can say and do whatever you want. And they know this. And many people will believe it. Many people will believe it. How many recalls are we going to have to watch and see how it was just a big lie that person got back in office? How many times are we going to have to see that? Now, I'm not in the right left, but I can tell you that a whole lot of people in California were behind Thump and did not want the nuisance to come back. And it was to the point where everyone's scratching their head looking at him saying, how did that happen? Well, we know how it happened. We know how it happened. They control the information and the data. They control what they want to say about it. And if you say it's not true or real, they call you a liar or a misinfo agent or whatever else they want to do. So, all right, you guys. Well, I'm going to let you go. Hope you guys all have a great day. And I am uploading a video that I had to take down from the channel. It'll upload tonight. It's the one about Gulliver's Travels. And also, when in the Bible, man wanted a king and what God said would happen. Now, many of you saw that, but a lot of you didn't. So I was able to remaster that, edit out the words that I said that somehow triggered the algos, and it now went through. So it's sitting here on the server and it's ready to scheduled to play like tonight. So stay tuned for that. Look in your feed and that should pop up tonight. If you're interested in seeing that show, it's very interesting, talking about the links between Gulliver's Travels, the Nephilim giants, and the Thump legacy. I love each and every one of you. I hope you guys have a great day. Take care and be safe.